sweatshirt with raglan sleeves. These examples have got hoods. I used the hood pattern from the coat, and they've got the pockets from the sweatshirt with set-in sleeves as well. You can mix and match. They have no ribbing, so I've just hemmed both the waist and the cuffs. Pattern pieces you need: front and back on a fold, pocket on a fold, and sleeve 2 on the straight grain. Okay, cutting the fabric for the raglan sweatshirt. You've got a front and a back on a fold. Pin those down and cut them out close to the pattern edge, making sure you cut tightly in the curved areas of the neck and the armhole, and make sure that you put your markings in. So for the front, you've got the front sleeve marking and the centre front mark, and for the back sleeve marking and the centre back. Sleeve, cutting 2 in a fold, cut it out close to the pattern piece, and again remember to cut closely to those curves and put your markings in for your front and your back on your sleeve. The front is the lower one. And we're going to cut ribbing for the sleeve, same as the sweatshirt with a set-in sleeve, about 6 to 8 centimetres wide, and same with the waistband measurement, 6 to 8 centimetres wide. Right, we're going to sew the armhole seam of the sweatshirt, and with the raglan sleeve you're going to sew 4 armhole sleeves. Start off with the front one first, so take one sleeve and pin it right side facing to the front, matching the front armhole markings, and pinning at the top and the bottom of the seam. Sew the seam from the neck to the armhole and clip in the armhole area where it's quite a tight curve. You're going to sew this with zigzag stitch, 3mm in length and 3mm in width, back stitch to begin and end your seams to make them secure. And you're actually going to sew the same style of seam 4 times altogether as you attach the sleeve and the back and the fronts all together. So the second one we're going to attach is the other sleeve to the front, and again right sides facing, pin it together and repeat your sewing, and you end up doing it to all 4 sides. If you want, you can pin them all 4 to begin with and sew them all consecutively. So remember to clip in at that very tight armhole curve and press your sleeves towards your armhole seams towards your sleeves on all 4 sides. Okay, so now we're going to add ribbing for the neck opening. We need to cauterise the neck, which means we have a centre front pin, centre back pin, and then measure halfway between the 2 pins for the other pin on each side. And then we measure the ribbing from one pin to another, and we multiply that by 3. So we're getting 3/4 of the neck distance, plus 2 centimetres for a seam allowance, and we sew that together with straight stitch. If you don't have ribbing, you still need to do the cauterising so that you can attach a hood with the centre back of the hood and a little bit of a crossover at the front. Right, so you flatten the seam down and fold it lengthways, put a pin in for the centre back, which is where the seam is going to go. Fold it halfway to find the centre front of the ribbing, put a pin in there, and then fold in between to find the other 2 points. And so we've cauterised the ribbing to match the cauterised neck. Then we're going to pin it together. So we start with the centre back and attach it, and then we can work our way around all the other 3 pins. And then pin in between so that your fabrics are secured together to help you sew. I'm going to sew the neck to the sweatshirt using zigzag stitch. Back stitch to begin with to secure the seam, zigzag around and back stitch to secure at the end of the seam. We can clip the neck if we want, and we can also top stitch it down, and I use twin needle for this particular one, and at the same time as top stitching it down, it's actually doing a neatening job at the back of the neck. So we're going to press the seam of the neck opening towards the body of the t-shirt all the way round, and if you're going to top stitch it, you can do it after you're pressing or beforehand. Right, side seams. With the right sides facing, we're going to pin together the body and sleeve of the sweatshirt at the lower edge of front and back, armhole seams and sleeve edges. We pin between these pins, and we're going to end up sewing the seam from the lower edge towards the sleeve edge. So the more pins, the merrier. It means that you're not going to have a distorted seam, and it's all going to be helpful when you sew. So start with back stitch, zigzag seam up to the armhole. When you get to the armhole, take your time because it's quite bulky, and the reason you go from the waist to the sleeve is that you're going to sew the armhole seam in the direction that it's been pressed in previously. When we get to the end of the cuff, we need to do the back stitch to secure it. When pressing the side seam, we press it towards the back of the sweatshirt body, and I have a piece of cardboard which I pop in to do seams of sleeves. Right, we're going to do the hems, and it's the same as the neck. We're going to have our ribbing. It's a bit wider than the neck, and we cut a rectangle of it. It's 8 centimetres wide and 3/4 the length of the sleeve cuff. So we've put 4 pins in the sleeve cuff, cauterising the sleeve cuff, and we'll do the same with the ribbing. Straight stitch seam to join the ribbing in the tube shape. Back stitch to begin and end to secure, and we flatten out the seam when we fold the ribbing in half lengthwise. And we're going to put pins in at the seam, and that will be where it joins the sleeve at the side seam in the sleeve, and we'll cauterise the rest of the cuff so that it can match the other 3 pins. So just like the neck, we're going to attach it to the right side of the sleeve. Use as many pins, you may only get about 4 pins in because they're quite small. And this seam is quite tricky because it's quite tiny. So you need to take your time when sewing it on your machine and just move it around and make sure you lift out any fabric so there's no tucks. You're just taking your time. Sew a bit of the seam, shift it out of the way, sew a bit, shift it out of the way. And press your cuff seam towards the sleeve. Right, the lower edge hem. We're doing the same, we're cauterising the waist, the lower edge of the sweatshirt, putting our 4 pins in at the centre back and centre front and the side seams, finding 3/4 of that measurement and cutting that length and ribbing with a 2 centimetre seam allowance. Again, we sew that tube together to make a circle with straight stitch, back stitch to begin and end it to secure the seam, and we fold our ribbing in half lengthwise, flatten out the seam and put a pin there. That is the centre back. Placing the seam at the centre back means that at your side seams it's not too bulky to sew over, and it's where that bulk is that you can get errors. So we're cauterising the ribbing just as we did the neck and matching it up with the sweatshirt base. So centre back at the centre back with the rib and work it all the way round all ready and pinned to go. As many pins as you can so that you don't have any difficulties when sewing it. We start at the centre back with the back stitch of zigzag and do a zigzag seam all the way around. And when we get to the end, we secure the seam with a zigzag back stitch as well. And when we're finished, we're going to press the seam of the waist, the ribbing, towards the body of the garment.